أهلا بكم في تطبيق قرطاج.
At the southern-eastern extremity of the coastal plains of Carthage, not far from the Tophet and practically on the seashore, were two basins, easily identifiable by their form, the first round, the second rectangular, and separated by a narrow channel. These two lagoons did not escape the notice of travellers of the ancient world, notably Chateaubriand, who after visiting Carthage the 7th and 8th of March 1807 believed he had identified the famous ports of the old Punic city, one of the sites of the last episode in the history of Carthage, when Scipio's soldiers landed to attack the ports, agora and citadel of the great city. The exact identification of these two lagoons has troubled archaeological researchers since the beginning of the 20th century. Both ports were dug by man. They were therefore artificial ports. Despite difficult terrain, digs have established that the circular lagoon served as Carthage's military port. In this circular dock, foundations for the quays were built in the central island with large carved blocks of limestone from the famous quarries of El Hawariya, and a series of columns were built, of identical diameter and different heights, installed at equal distances from each other. These columns supported tilted ramps of a series of dry or winter docks. These ramps sloped towards the water and were for ships. Formal identification of this military port was confirmed by a British team working from 1974 to 1983 as part of the international campaign funded by UNESCO for saving the site of Carthage. Work on this site showed that this port was built towards the end of the 3rd century BC, several decades before the last Punic War. The large blocks of limestone were used for a variety of architectural elements, foundations, columns and lintels to support parts of the roofs. Fragments of the roof found indicate a flat roof supported by a wooden framework. Precise archaeological studies have also led to a minute reconstitution of the techniques used and the various stages of construction, and what great skill and knowledge they had. This circular dock has a radius of 160 metres and a circumference of 1,020 metres, with, in the centre, an island of a diameter of 120 metres. The total surface area was about 15 acres. Ancient writers report that large circular quays were all around the island and banks of the port, and that all the way along these quays there were hangars housing 220 ships. Digs by British archaeologists have revealed how accurate these descriptions were. The central island could house 30 vessels, however the whole port, according to their calculations, could only house 140 vessels, although it is true that the dig has not yet been completed. Precise dating of the construction of this war port is also an important part of the city's history. It has been formally shown that this fortified port dated from the years before the Third Punic War, just when Cato gave the Senate the command Delenda est Carthago. Carthage must be destroyed. This construction was a sort of response to this threat and clear proof of Carthage's dynamism as the city prepared for war. On the ramp sloping into the water were wooden drafts making a surface on which the boats could be hauled in. The width of these ramps has been calculated and corresponds perfectly to the dimensions of the greatest ancient warship, the trireme or triere, the renowned ship with 3 rows of oars, which was designed to be the queen of the seas. We know nothing about the towing system used. It is supposed that the ships were pulled up by men or animals using a pulley tow line system, perhaps concealed in the roof structure. Ships were most definitely kept in these shelters, as proved by the discovery of shells, probably off the hull, and copper nails from the skeleton, dislodged as the ship was hauled up the ramp. This is how Carthage kept the war fleet, its great force protected and dry, well guarded and far from jealous regards. It was the Greek historian Polybius, a friend of General Scipio, who witnessed the last battle of Carthage and made a detailed description of these ports. Another historian, the Greek Appian, later reported his observations. The ports, he said, were laid out in such a way that the ships went from one to the other. From the sea they entered by an opening 70 feet wide, which was closed with iron chains. The first port was for merchants and had many different mooring places. The ports were surrounded by a double wall and doors that allowed the merchants from the first port to dock in town without having to cross the dockyards. Even for the merchants who came in on their ships, the dockyard was invisible. In the middle of the interior port was an island. The island and the port were edged with large quays. All along these quays were rooms that could house 220 vessels. On the island a pavilion was built for the admiral, where he could make trumpet signals and herald cries and keep a lookout. The island was opposite the entry and much higher up, so the admiral could see who was at sea. Ships coming in couldn't see clearly into the inside of the port. Travellers or businessmen coming to Carthage discovered a fortified town. From the 5th century BC, the maritime ramparts, discovered and reconstructed by German researchers, gave the city a monumental facade. The rampart, complete with towers and doors, 5.20 metres thick, walled off the whole coastal plain and extended to the south, encompassing, from the 2nd century BC, the wall of the circular warport, which was also fortified. This wall was brilliant white, built in large blocks of limestone from El Hawariya, crowned with moulded cornices and covered with fine white stucco which made it sparkle in the sun. Before reaching the ports and therefore the city, the ships went through into a sort of outer harbour area, given the name of the man who discovered it in the 19th century, the Danish consul Christian Falber. The only remains today of what is called the Falber quadrilateral are slightly submerged structures. Many questions have been asked about the nature and function of this structure. Almost certainly dating from the Punic era, it seems likely that it was a platform for manoeuvres, and also for unloading and stocking merchandise. It may also have housed an office for collecting taxes. This zone extends to the south, ending with a point, successfully protecting the ships against dominant winds and allowing them to enter the ports safely. Whether the ships were part of the war fleet or commercial fleet, all the boats first went through the entry passage that led to the merchant port. Thus the ports had a communal entry from the sea that was secured with iron chains. This commercial port, in rectangular form, was 150 metres by 400 metres and covered around 17 acres. Recent digs carried out by American archaeologists have shown this merchant port had quays of which the oldest dates from the second half of the 3rd century BC. It was on these quays that the sailors and businessmen, Carthaginian and foreign, unloaded their precious merchandise. This is how warships were permitted to proceed through to the other port, via a closed channel to which access was strictly controlled. From his guard post, the admiral of the fleet watched the manoeuvres, authorising the opening of the doors. After a long sea voyage, sailors continued rowing to guide ships to their winter harbour. In front of each docking station, Appian wrote, were 2 Ionic columns giving the circumference of the island port the look of a portico. The ships had to be brought in carefully, with skill, protected from regards and danger, carrying out the final manoeuvre allowing the ship to enter its dock where, at least for a short time, it would be protected.